Hyunju sits in his office deep within the mansion. The room is dimly lit, illuminated only by the bluish glow of numerous monitors. Encrypted lines scroll across the screens, financial flows are tracked, and transactions are processed through shell accounts. His fingers glide silently across the keyboard, plotting yet another scheme. In this house, every room is equipped with surveillance systems. Every move is recorded. An atmosphere of constant danger and control permeates it. His face betrays no emotion, only cold concentration. Here, in the heart of his digital empire, he remains the same ruthless boss as he is in the real world. His every decision is a calculated move, every action part of a complex game where the slightest mistake costs lives. He rarely leaves this office, preferring to manage his criminal empire from behind screens. The house is not a refuge, but another fortified node in his web of power. The silence around him is deceptive. It conceals the constant work of a complex mechanism built on deception and force. Nothing breaks his concentration until he hears a soft, rustling sound behind the door. His face is completely calm, but there is cold disappointment in his eyes. He just saw his maid, Kim Mi-hee, stealing his things. She put an expensive watch, a bottle of perfume, and exotic fruits from the kitchen into her bag. Hyunju didn't come out right away. He waited for her to finish. When he appeared in the doorway, the woman flinched. The bag fell from her hands. The stolen items scattered across the polished floor. She makes no attempt to justify herself. She knows you can't fool this man. "I'm sorry," she says quietly. Hyunju looks at her. He knows about her difficult husband. He knows there's not enough money. His house is overflowing with everything. One call from him would solve all her problems. But she didn't ask. She stole. Systematically and brazenly. "You're fired," he says evenly. "Pack your things." He sees her hands shaking. Before she leaves, he takes a thick envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. "Take them. You need them." She takes the envelope slowly, not looking him in the eyes. "Why?" she whispers. "Because I don't want your husband to go hungry," Hyun replies. "Ju-hae. But remember, it all starts small. Then comes something bigger. People who steal trust little by little eventually want to steal it all. It would be better if you just asked." Mi-hee leaves. Her shoulders are hunch-hinged. She is burning with shame. A few hours later, Hyunju is sitting at his desk. He's conducting an interview. News of his dismissal spread quickly. There are plenty of people in town who want to work for him. Everyone knows he pays handsomely. A woman enters the office. Her name is Amy. She is dressed modestly but neatly. It's clear from her demeanor that she desperately needs the job. "Sit down," Hyun says. "Ju?" He asks the standard questions. He asks about work experience, about references, about marital status. "Is everything stable in your personal life?" he asks. "Are you planning on taking frequent days off? Won't the kids interfere with your work?" Amy takes a deep breath, looks him straight in the eyes. "No, sir. My personal life is in perfect order. I have no children. I can devote myself entirely to work. I won't need any unscheduled time off. I have extensive experience. I can handle all the responsibilities." She speaks confidently. Her words sound convincing. Her resume is impeccable. Hyunju nods. Overall, he's pleased. Only the slight movement of her eyes to the side alarms him. But he chalks it up to nervousness. He doesn't know that she just lied to him about the most important thing. Ami is a good person, but yesterday her husband left her. He took all the money and furniture. Her 7-year-old son Lee is waiting for her on the street now. They have no home, no food. They spent the night at the train station. A friend of hers used to work here. She told Amy about the house's layout. Amy knows there are rarely used rooms on the top floor. She could hide the child there. It's a crazy risk. But she's a mother. She has no choice. "You're accepted," Hyun says. "Ju-yu? You can start work tomorrow." Ami nods. Her expression is one of gratitude. But inside, she's gripped by fear. She needs to get her son home today. Otherwise, he'll have nowhere to sleep. Hyunju gives orders to her assistant. "Show her the house. Let her get acquainted with the grounds." Amy leaves the office. Her hands are shaking slightly. She has to find that one room, the one where her son will be safe. At least until his first paycheck. She follows her assistant through the corridors. The house is huge, luxurious, silent. Her gaze catches the staircase to the top floor, where salvation awaits her, or new trouble. Amy silently follows the boss's assistant through the mansion's endless corridors. Her eyes discreetly take in every detail: the location of the cameras, the security schedule, the staff's work cycle. She asks questions in a calm, businesslike tone. "Which areas require the most frequent cleaning?" she asks, her voice professional. "I want to understand the priorities right away." The assistant, a young man in a formal suit, readily answers. He shows us the main living rooms, the boss's office, and the dining room. "What about the upper floors?" Amy pauses at the stairs. "Do they clean them daily there too?" The assistant shakes his head. "No, those are guest rooms. They're only cleaned before guests arrive or after they leave." He lowers his voice. The boss himself almost never comes upstairs. "It's always quiet there." Amy nods, keeping her expression impassive. Her insides freeze. This is exactly what she needs. They go up to the third floor. The assistant points to a long corridor with several doors. These rooms are usually empty. He approaches the last door at the end of the corridor, and this one is the furthest one. There's a separate key here. He takes a small keychain from his pocket and opens the door. The room turns out to be small but clean. It contains a bed, a nightstand, and a wardrobe. The windows have thick curtains. The air is a little stuffy, but that's a minor issue. "Perfect," Amy thinks. But out loud she says, "I see. So, I only clean here on special orders." The assistant confirms. They go down. Amy heads to Hyun's office. "Ju." She finds him collecting documents. "Sir, I've familiarized myself with the area. I'm ready to report for duty," she says clearly and confidently. Hyunju nods, not looking up from her papers. "Okay. I have urgent matters to attend to. I won't be back until nightfall." He leaves the office without looking at her and leaves the table. Amy's heart is pounding. This is incredible luck. She has a few hours. She walks out into the hall and sees the staff heading to the cafeteria. It's lunchtime. She has an hour. Amy approaches one of the guards. "I haven't fully studied the layout yet. I'll go over it again while everyone's busy." The guard nods indifferently. Her explanation sounds logical. She waits until the corridors are empty. Then, with quick, silent steps, she heads for the back entrance. Her palms are sweating. Every second counts. Amy slips out into the street. She runs around the building and to a small park across the street. There, on a bench, sits her son. Lee, seeing his mother, jumps up. His eyes are full of hope. "Quiet," Amy whispers, grabbing his hand. "Not a word. Follow me quickly. Keep your eyes forward." The boy nods. He is pale, frightened, but obedient. Ami holds his hand tightly. They cross the road and slip through the service entrance into the house. The hallways are empty. Everyone is still in the dining room. They practically run down the long corridors. The stairs to the third floor seem endless. Amy's heart is pounding. Every sound, every creak of a floorboard makes her freeze. Here they are at that very door. Amy quickly takes out the key, which she had discreetly taken from her assistant's keychain while he was turning away. Her hand is shaking. The key turns in the lock with a creaking sound. They're inside. Amy slams the door and leans her back against it, trying to catch her breath. Lee stands in the middle of the room, his eyes wide. The room is clean and quiet. The muffled noise of the city can be heard through the thick curtains. They are safe. For now. "You must sit here quietly." Amy sits down in front of him, looking him straight in the eyes. "Don't go out. Don't make any noise. Don't open the door for anyone. I'll come when I can." Lee nods. He understands. He's only 7, but he already knows what fear and need are. Ami remembers lunch. She leaves the room, quietly locking the door. Her turn in the cafeteria has already passed, but she notices a forgotten tray of food on one of the tables. Quickly, before anyone sees, she takes it. She comes back into the room. She places the tray in front of Elle. "Eat." The boy greedily pounces on the food. Ami looks at him, her heart breaking with a mixture of love, fear, and shame. She waits for him to eat, takes the empty tray, and hides it again. "I have to go to work. The lock is on the outside. I'll lock you in. Don't be afraid." Lee nods, his eyes already drooping. He lies down on the bed and falls asleep almost instantly, Fatigue and fullness take their toll. Amy leaves, turns the key, and returns to her duties. She cleans the office, the living rooms, the kitchen. Her movements are precise and professional. No one can suspect what's going on inside her. The evening passes in a state of nervous tension. Every step outside the door, every sound on the stairs makes her jump. She constantly listens for the sound of a child's cry or footsteps from upstairs. But silence reigns above. Night is falling. Hyung-ju returns. He walks into his office without looking at her. Amy continues working, but her thoughts are still there, in the small room on the third floor. Is her child well fed? Is he cold? Has he woken up in fear? She can't believe they've pulled it off. The first, most dangerous step has been taken, but weeks of this life lie ahead. And any little thing could ruin them. When the house is quiet, Amy sneaks upstairs with a sandwich and water she grabbed from the kitchen. Lee is asleep. She leaves the food on the nightstand and quietly leaves. She lies down on her bed in the servants' quarters, but sleep won't come. Every creak, every rustle seems like guards' footsteps. Her nerves are taut as a bowstring. They've lasted one day, but how many more are ahead? And how will it all end? Hyun-ju returned late. The entire house had already fallen into the silence of the night, except for Amy, who was still polishing the banisters of the main staircase until they shone. Hearing his footsteps, she straightened up and put down her rag. "Did you have a normal day?" His voice rang out unexpectedly loudly in the silence. He took off his jacket and threw it over the back of the chair. Amy nodded quickly, trying to keep her voice even. "Yes, sir. Everything is fine. No problems." He walked slowly down the hall, his gaze sweeping over the immaculate surfaces. "Good. By the way, my relatives are arriving tomorrow morning." He stopped and looked at her. "Two sisters with their husbands. They'll be staying a few days." Amy felt her hands go cold. She swallowed. "They need to prepare the rooms," Hyun continued. "Ju." He looked up. "Specifically, that room at the end of the hallway on the third floor, the one with a separate key. It needs to be brought to perfection. Fresh linens, aired out, thoroughly cleaned." Amy's ears began to ring. The room. The very room where her son was now sleeping. Her only refuge. Her heart began to pound so loudly she thought he could hear it. Her entire carefully crafted plan was crumbling in an instant. The very first day, and such a disaster. She forced a smile. She gave a short, businesslike nod. "Of course, sir. I'll do anything. I remember that room." Inside, everything was turning upside down. Where would she put Elle? All his few belongings? She needed to find another place quickly. But where? All the upstairs rooms would be occupied. The number of people in the house would double. The chances of being discovered would increase exponentially. Every sound, every movement of the child would be under surveillance. "Excellent," Hyun said. Ju turned and took a step toward the stairs. "Come on, I'll show you exactly what needs to be done, so there are no misunderstandings." He walked up the stairs. Ami, her legs suddenly feeling weak, trudged after him. Her mind was racing. She had to warn Lee, whisper to him to stay quiet. But how? The boss was only a few steps ahead. They climbed to the third floor. The corridor was immersed in semi-darkness, lit only by the night lights. The air was still and cool. They passed several doors. With each step, Amy felt the panic growing. She silently prayed for Elle to sleep soundly, for him not to make a sound. Hyun-ju stopped right in front of that very door. He extended his hand to say something, and at that very moment, a distinct, loud sound came from behind the door. The sound of something heavy falling to the floor. The sound of a book falling. Amy froze. Time stood still for her. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin icy cold. This was the end, everything. Hyun-ju turned sharply toward the door, his brows furrowed. His relaxed posture instantly turned wary. "What is it?" His voice became quiet and sharp as a blade. "Probably a draft," Amy managed to say, not believing her own words. Her voice sounded weak and false. No, Hyun-ju wasn't listening anymore. His instincts, honed by years of living in a world of danger and deception, kicked in instantly. In an empty room that should be locked, there was nothing to fall. He grabbed the door handle with a sharp movement. It was locked. He turned to Amy. His gaze became heavy and piercing. "The key," he said curtly. Amy's hands were shaking so much that she had difficulty getting the ring of keys out of her pocket. She tried to find the right one, but her fingers wouldn't obey. Hyunju silently snatched the key from her, found the key himself, and inserted it into the lock. The click sounded like a gunshot. He swung the door open and stepped inside. Amy stood there, unable to move. She expected screams, a child's cries, questions. She imagined Lee's frightened face. Her legs buckled. The room was plunged into darkness. Hyunju flicked the switch. Light suddenly flooded the space. Amy closed her eyes. But nothing happened. Not a sound. She forced herself to open her eyes. Hyunju stood in the middle of the room, slowly looking around. His gaze slid over the neatly made bed, the empty nightstand, and the closed closets. A small reference book lay on the floor next to one of the closets, apparently originally on its top shelf. Nothing else. Lee was nowhere to be seen. Hyunju walked further and peered into the small adjoining closet. It, too, was empty. He bent down, picked up the book, and placed it on the nightstand. His face remained inscrutable. "A draft," he repeated her words, a hint of mockery in his voice. He glanced around the room again, then walked back out into the hallway. They must have locked it wrong last time. The vibration knocked the book over. Amy nodded silently. She couldn't make a sound. Only now did she notice that the door of one of the built-in closets wasn't completely closed. A narrow gap remained, and in that gap, in the darkness, for a split second, she saw the glint of two frightened children's eyes. Lee was there. He'd hidden. He'd heard footsteps, and had gotten there in time. The relief that washed over her was so strong that she felt dizzy again. She could barely stay on her feet. Hyunju seemed oblivious to her condition. He became businesslike again. "So, as I said, my older sister will be staying here. She needs peace and quiet. The bed linen is to be black and silk. The water is to be changed twice a day. Only white lilies are to be used in the vase. Nothing else." He turned and walked further down the hallway, pointing out other rooms and giving directions. Amy followed him like a robot, nodding and repeating his words. She couldn't comprehend anything. Her thoughts were there, in the dark closet, where her little son trembled with fear. Finally, Hyunju finished. "Is everything clear?" he asked, descending the stairs. "Yes, sir. Quite clearly," Amy replied, and this time her voice sounded almost normal. He nodded, dismissing her and heading for his study. Amy remained standing downstairs until his footsteps faded into the depths of the house. Then, trying not to run, she went back upstairs. She didn't enter the room, but merely paused by the door, listening. From behind the door came the soft, barely audible whisper of a child. "Mom, are you there? I didn't mean to. I was just looking at a book and dropped it." Amy pressed her palm to the door, as if she could convey her relief through the wood. "Quiet, sweetheart," she whispered through the crack. "Quiet, I know. Good for you for hiding. Stay quiet. I'll be back soon." She tore herself away from the door and walked slowly away. The first assault had been withstood, but tomorrow would be the real battle. And she didn't even know from which direction the next attack would come. Amy stood in the middle of the room on the third floor, listening to Hyun's fading footsteps. "Ju!" When the sound of his footsteps finally faded, she leaned her forehead against the cool surface of the door, trying to stop her knees from shaking. The crisis had been temporarily averted, but now she faced a new, almost impossible task. She turned the key and quietly entered the room. The closet door immediately opened, and Elle slipped out. His face was pale with fear, his eyes full of tears. "Mom, I was very scared," he whispered, hugging her legs. Ami crouched down in front of him, hugging him tightly. "I know, honey, I know. You did the right thing by hiding. You're a true hero." She pulled him away to look him in the eye. "But right now, we need to pack our things quickly. We can't stay here." She quickly began packing their meager belongings into a small bag she'd smuggled in. Spare clothes for Elle and her, toothbrushes, a few apples and sandwiches from the kitchen. Her movements were sharp, jerky. Every second counted. She knew her relatives would arrive in the morning, meaning she only had the night to find a new shelter and move her son there. "Why are we leaving?" Elle asked quietly, watching as she took down from the nightstand his drawing, drawn in pencil on the back of an old bill. "Because we have guests come, Ki," Amy replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "People, and we can't let them see you." She glanced around the room, making sure she hadn't forgotten anything. Her plan, so fragile and risky, was falling apart on the very first day. Where would they go? Perhaps the attic? Or the utility room in the basement? But all those places were regularly checked by guards or other servants. This room was their only safe spot, and now they were losing even that. She had just grabbed her bag in one hand and Elle's hand in the other, preparing for a quiet escape into the unknown, when suddenly footsteps sounded again outside the door. Heavy, confident, approaching. Not the light steps of a maid, not the hurried tread of an assistant. These were Hyun's, Ju. Ami froze in place, her fingers clutching her son's hand. He shouldn't have come back. He'd said everything he wanted. Her thoughts raced. Hide Elle and go back to the closet? But he was already standing in the middle of the room, next to her, bag in hand. It was too late. The door opened without knocking. Hyunju stood in the doorway. His gaze, neutral at first, slid over her, then settled on the small figure pressed against her leg. He stared for several seconds, his face completely unreadable. No anger, no surprise, just silent anticipation. Ami's insides sank. This was the moment she'd dreaded most. The moment when it all ended. The trap snapped shut. A cold wave of fear swept through her body, and the world swam before her eyes. She felt her knees buckle, and she barely managed to hold on, clutching the headboard. She found it hard to breathe. Her mind was racing with fragments of thoughts. The former maid, Mi-hee. She'd been fired for stealing. She'd deceived him, stolen small things from him. Amy looked at her son's terrified face, then at her boss's stony expression. Her deception had been far greater. She hadn't stolen perfume or food from him. She'd stolen his safety, his trust. By letting a stranger, a child, into his home. She'd lied to him from the very beginning, from the interview. "Sir, Her voice broke, turning into a hoarse whisper. She couldn't find the words. What excuse could there be? She'd been caught red-handed. The child was here, in his private quarters, in a room that should have been empty. Mi-hee's story now seemed like a minor prank compared to what she'd done. If she'd been fired for stealing things, then her fate must be far worse. Firing was the best outcome she could hope for. The worst. She dreaded even thinking about the worst. After all, he was a MAFIA member. People they do not forgive such violations. Lee pressed closer to her, sensing the power and danger emanating from the man. He remained silent, captivated by the stranger's terrifying silent gaze. Hyunju didn't move. He didn't shout, didn't demand an explanation. He simply waited. His calm was frightening. He oppressed with his silence, his stillness. He was judge, jury, and executioner, all rolled into one. And now he was passing sentence on her in his head. Amy understood that she could only hope for a miracle. But miracles had never happened in her life. Only failure, betrayal, and despair. And now, with her own hands, she had destroyed her and her son's last chance for salvation. She stood and awaited her fate, feeling tears of shame and despair fill her eyes. It was over. Ami stood there, clutching her son, speechless. There was pressure in her temples, cold sweat on her back, and a chilling terror paralyzing every cell in her body. She felt Elle tremble slightly, his face buried in her dress. This was the end. The most terrible and humiliating end she could ever imagine. She slowly looked up at Hyunju's eyes filled with tears. Tears of shame, despair, and hopelessness. Her fingers dug into her son's shoulders. I couldn't help it. Her voice broke, sounding hoarse and broken. She forced herself to continue, knowing she had to tell the truth before he threw them out into the street. Please, understand. My husband, he left. Yesterday. Took everything. All the money, even the furniture. We have nothing left. Absolutely nothing. The words burst out, hot and chaotic, mingling with sobs. She didn't try to hold them back. It was all over anyway. Elle, he didn't even have a bed. Not a crumb of food. We spent the night at the train station. I couldn't leave him alone on the street. I'm a mother! Her voice rose to a desperate whisper. She hugged her son even tighter, as if trying to protect him from the inevitable reprisal. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was deceiving you, but I had no choice. For him. Only for him. She fell silent, exhausted, her head bowed. She expected everything. A cold order to get out. Threats. Perhaps worse. She'd heard stories of the brutality of mafia clans. Her imagination conjured up the most terrifying images. She was prepared to hear, "Your problems don't interest me. You're fired. Get off my property while you're still alive." But instead, silence fell over the room, deep, drawn out, broken only by her sobs and the baby's heavy breathing. Hyunju didn't move. His gaze, still heavy and unreadable, was fixed on Elle's small figure, which peeked out tremblingly from behind the folds of her dress. Several eternity-long seconds passed, and then his face changed, not dramatically, not abruptly. The stony mask simply softened, the sternness in his eyes gave way to something else. Not pity, no, more like understanding, appreciation. He slowly turned his gaze to Amy. "You didn't steal anything from me," he finally said. His voice was low and even, without a hint of anger. The words came so unexpectedly that Amy didn't immediately process them. She froze, not believing her ears. "I see the difference," he continued calmly. "One stole out of greed and laziness. You acted for your child. As a mother, for his survival. That's a different story." Amy slowly raised her eyes to him. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she no longer tried to brush them away. She looked at him, trying to detect a trick, a mockery, a lie in his eyes. But she saw only a cold yet impartial clarity. "It's not a problem for me if the child lives in this house," Hyun said, Ju. He took a small step forward, and Elle instinctively recoiled, but the boss stopped, not advancing any further. His gaze was fixed on the boy. "On two conditions. He must not interfere with the work. And he must be obedient. I do not tolerate chaos in my house." The world turned upside down. Amy felt the floor disappear beneath her feet, but this time from shock and incredible, deafening relief. She swallowed convulsively, trying to force her brain to work, to process what had been said. "Sir, She shook her head, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I'm so ashamed. From day one, I betrayed your trust. I don't deserve such kindness." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," he corrected her, his voice for the first time taking on a note of his usual businesslike firmness. "I value loyalty, and a mother's devotion to her child is the strongest of all. You risked everything for him. That commands respect." He, a mafioso, a man from a world where cruelty and deceit reigned, spoke to her of respect. It seemed that all her notions of the world were crumbling in an instant. He was human, far more human than her own husband, who had abandoned them to their fate. Relief, hot and all-consuming, washed over her in a wave. She burst into tears again, but this time they were tears of happiness, of liberation from the monstrous burden of fear. "Thank you," she whispered, and it was the only word she could find. "Thank you so much. I promise we won't be a burden. I'll get my paycheck, buy him a bed, food, and we'll move out right away. We'll find our own place. I don't want to abuse your understanding." She spoke quickly, excitedly, wanting to prove to him that she had no intention of living off him, that she was honest. Now that the fear had passed, she was filled with gratitude and a desire to make things right. Hyunju listened to her, his head tilted slightly to the side. When she finished, he slowly shook his head. "There's no need for that," he said simply. Amy fell silent, staring at him. "I said I had no problem with the child being here. It wasn't a temporary solution." His gaze became piercing, looking directly at her. "I want you both to stay, you and your son." She opened her mouth to speak, but found no words. Her mind refused to comprehend. And then he spoke words that turned everything upside down once again, words she couldn't have imagined even in her wildest imagination. "Moreover," Hyun continued, Ju, and his voice took on a strange, unfamiliar softness. "I want you to become my wife, and your son, to become my son." A complete, deafening silence fell over the room. Amy held her breath. She stared at this powerful, dangerous, incomprehensible man, trying to find any hint of a joke, any cruel play in his face, but his expression was absolutely serious, determined. He wasn't just offering her a roof over her head. He was offering them a name, a family, protection, everything she couldn't give her son herself, everything she couldn't even dream of. It was madness, swift, blinding, terrifying madness. But in her shattered world, where fear was her only support, This madness seemed like the only salvation. Like a miracle she had already stopped believing in. 3 weeks passed, 3 weeks of silence, order, and a strange, unfamiliar calm. Les' room was no longer a secret refuge. It was now his room, with a new bed, toys that Hyunju brought back the drawings on the walls with a single, discreet nod to his assistant. Fear gave way to timid hope, and then to quiet joy. Amy carried out her duties with redoubled zeal, but now her work was no longer burdened by lies. She could openly visit her son to make sure he was okay. Lee, an obedient and intelligent boy, quickly learned the rules of the house. He played quietly in his room or in the small living room set aside for him, read books, and in the evenings, after Hyunju returned, and he and his mother dined with him. At first, these dinners were silent, but gradually, El began to timidly share his impressions of the day. And Hyunju listened, nodding, his stern face occasionally softening with a barely noticeable smile. And then the day came for the relatives to arrive. The house was spotlessly clean. Ami personally checked every detail. She was nervous, but it was a different kind of nervousness. Not fear of being exposed, but a desire for everything to go perfectly for the man who had shown them such unparalleled generosity. Hyun's sisters arrived first. Ju and her husbands. The air filled with ringing voices, laughter, the sounds of kisses and greetings. The house, usually so silent and stern, came alive. Ami watched this, standing to the side in the shadows of the corridor, ready to fulfill any wish at any moment. She saw how Hyunju, always reserved, hugged his sisters and clapped his brothers-in-law on the shoulder. He seemed different, lighter, more human. That evening, the entire family gathered in the large dining room around a long oak table. The table was laden with exquisite dishes, and the aroma of expensive tea and sweets hung in the air. Amy and the other servants served the meal discreetly. The conversations flowed smoothly, discussing business, mutual acquaintances, and family news. And then, when one of Hyun's sisters, Ji-eun, asked about his plans, whether he was finally thinking of settling down and starting a family, and there was a short pause in the dining room, Hyunju slowly sipped from his porcelain cup. His gaze was calm. He set the cup on the saucer. The ringing sound of porcelain on porcelain sounded especially loud in the silence. "You're late with your question about the family," he said in an even, weighty tone that captured the attention of everyone present. All eyes turned to him. The sisters stopped chewing, and the brothers-in-law leaned forward curiously. "I've already found my family," Hyun continued. "Ju." He looked up, and his gaze, firm and clear, found Amy, standing by the buffet. He made a slight but unambiguous gesture, inviting her to come closer. Amy's heart skipped a beat, then started beating wildly. She stepped into the center of the room, feeling dozens of surprised eyes watching her. She was dressed in a simple yet elegant dark dress, her hands clasped in front of her to hide her trembling. "Amy is not just my housekeeper anymore." Hyun's voice, Ju's tone was commanding, and brooked no argument. "She's my fiancée. In a month, she'll be my wife." Complete silence reigned in the dining room. A bird could be heard flying past the window. The relatives' faces expressed shock, incomprehension, and their attempts to quickly process what they had just heard. And then Hyunju turned toward the door and beckoned to Lee. The boy, dressed in a new suit, timidly entered the dining room. He approached his mother and firmly grasped her hand, looking sheepishly at the strangers. "And this is Lee," said Hyun. Ju, and for the first time, a warm, almost paternal tone entered his voice. He extended his hand, and the boy, after a moment's hesitation, approached him. Hyunju placed his large hand on his shoulder. "My adopted son." The effect was like an explosion. Ji-eun gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Her husband cleared his throat. The other sister, So-yeon, widened her eyes. "Hyungju, but it's so sudden," Z began. But her brother stopped her with one look. "The decision has been made. Final and irrevocable," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "I present to you my future wife and my son. I expect you to welcome them into our family with the same respect you have shown me." There was another pause, but this time it was broken by Lee. Embarrassed by everyone's attention, he whispered, looking at Hyunju. "Dad, can I go? My drawing isn't finished." The word dad, spoken so naturally and sincerely, hung in the air. and something softened on the relatives' faces. So, Jan was the first to smile. Of course you can, darling, she said warmly. Then she raised her glass. Her gaze met Amy's, and it was filled with not only curiosity, but also budding acceptance. Well, Hyungju, Ami, Lee, and for your family, for your happiness. One by one, at first hesitantly, then with increasing confidence, the others raised their glasses. The ice was broken. Later, when the official part of the dinner was over and the relatives had dispersed to their living rooms, Ji-eun walked over to Amy, who was helping the servants clear the table. He was never happy, Sister Hun said quietly. Ju, looking at Ami inquiringly, but without hostility. His life has always been a battle. Loneliness. If you can change that, then welcome to our family. Amy nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She looked out the window where Hyun was on the terrace. Ju, talking with his son-in-law, gently stroked the head of Lee with one hand, who was sitting nearby on the steps and enthusiastically drawing something in the light of the street lamps. They weren't just saved. They found a home. And most importantly, they found a family. And in this new, unexpected world full of hope, her son would never again be hungry or afraid. He would be just a child, a son, Hyunju. 2 months have passed since the day Hyunju declared Ami and El his family. An unusual but lasting harmony reigned in the house. In the evenings, the three of them dined together, and Hyunju listened with genuine interest to Lee's stories about school events. Ami blossomed, her face losing traces of constant fear and fatigue, and a light appeared in her eyes. One evening, while helping Ami set the table, Lee shifted awkwardly and nearly dropped a crystal decanter. The boy's sharp, frightened gaze, his instant reaction to duck as if expecting a blow, pierced Hyun. Ju was sharper than any knife. This wasn't just fear, this was learned, muscle memory. Later, when El went to do his homework, Hyunju, looking at Ami, who was sitting quietly with a cup of tea, asked, "Does he always react like this? To sudden movements? To loud sounds?" Amy shuddered and lowered her eyes. He tries not to show it, but yes, there were times when his father would flare up quickly. Over little things. She said it quietly, wanting to leave the past behind. But for Hyunfor-ju, this past wasn't an abstraction. It was the reason for the fear in the eyes of his now son. "Tell me." His voice brooked no argument, but there was no anger in it. There was a heavy, cold confidence. Ami paused, then spoke. She wasn't crying. Her story was dry and emotionless, which made it all the more terrifying. She wasn't talking about major arguments, but about everyday humiliations, about how her husband would take the last of her money to buy alcohol while Elle was sick and needed medicine, how he'd yell at the boy for accidentally breaking a cup, how, on the day they left, he'd demonstratively thrown Eliu's only toy, an old teddy bear, into the trash, saying, "You've had enough of this." Hyunju listened without interrupting. His face was stony, but the fingers gripping the arm of his chair were white. When Amy finished, a heavy silence fell over the office. "He left you on the street, without money, without a roof over your head, with a child," Hyun said. Ju, and this was not a statement, but a sentence. "It's in the past, Hyun." "Ju," Ami said softly, touching his hand. "We have you now. We have everything. He's not worth your thoughts." "That's not in the past for me," he snapped, his eyes flashing steel. "It's a matter of principle. A man, a real man." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city at night. "A man doesn't abandon his own, doesn't humiliate a woman, doesn't break a child's spirit. That's not weakness. That's meanness. And meanness must be punished, not out of revenge, for the sake of justice." For him, raised in a cruel world where honor and duty weren't just empty words, but the law of survival, this man's actions represented an absolute, unthinkable downfall. He didn't simply abandon his family. He violated the most fundamental, unspoken law, the law of responsibility for those who depend on you. "I don't want you to take revenge," Amy said, alarm laced in her voice. She feared the violence from her past would seep into their new, fragile life. "This isn't revenge, Ami." He turned to her. His face was calm. "This is restoring order. He thinks he can do this and just disappear? That there's no payback for a child left to starve? No. In my world, everyone pays, and he will pay." The next morning, Hyunju summoned his most trusted assistant, Kim Dae-hee. "Find one person," the boss said, handing him a piece of paper with a name, last known address, and photograph. "I need information, all of it, where they work, who they hang out with, what their debts are, everything." Dae-hee, the man with the impassive face, nodded without asking any further questions. "It will be done, boss." The investigation took less than a week. The information Dae-hee provided was exhaustive. Ami's ex-husband, Jong Min-ho, hadn't simply fled. He'd moved to another part of the city, rented a small but expensive apartment with money he'd stolen from Amy Shi, and found a job as a manager at a reputable company, lying about his marital status on his resume. He'd been living the life of a successful bachelor, carefully concealing his past. Hyunju listened to the report, his face impassive. "He's not just a scoundrel, he's a coward. He built a new life on lies and money stolen from a child." "What do you want me to do, boss?" Dae-hee asked. Hyunju thought for a moment. Physical violence would be too easy and brutal. He needed something different, something fair and inevitable. "Does he value his new status, his job, his comfortable life?" Hyunju spoke each word slowly. "Fine, let him lose it all, but not because of us, because of himself." The plan was simple and elegant in its ruthlessness. 2 days later, the management of the company, where Min-ho worked, received an anonymous packet of documents. They included copies of his actual diplomas, his marriage certificate to Omi, neighbors' statements about his debts and drunken antics, and photos of him with Lee. No threats, no mention of Hyunju, just the facts proving that their new, promising manager is a thief, a liar, and a man who abandoned his own family. The consequences were immediate. A day later, Chang Min-ho was summoned to the director's office and fired for providing false documents and engaging in incriminating behavior. Simultaneously, his new girlfriend, who considered him a successful businessman, received a similar package and immediately broke off all relations with him. And the landlord of the rental apartment, who valued his reputation, politely but firmly asked him to vacate the premises. Overnight, Jang Min-ho lost everything he had so carefully built. He found himself on the street, but this time for real, alone, inconsolable, and with a ruined reputation that closed all doors to him. Hyunju, listening to Dae-hee's final report, merely nodded. He felt no satisfaction. He felt a sense of closure. Order had been restored. The price had been set and paid in full. That night, hugging Lee before bed, he said, "Remember, son, a man's true strength isn't in being loud or cruel. It's in protecting those who depend on you, and never abandoning your own." Lee, almost asleep, smiled and whispered, "I know, Dad." For Hyunju, this was the highest reward. He hadn't simply punished a scoundrel. He had taught his son the most important lesson of all, a lesson about honor, justice, and true strength. And this lesson was worth more than any revenge. After a few months of life in Hyun's house, Ju had found a new, lasting harmony. But one evening, watching Lee proudly show him her school project, Hyunju felt an unusual unease. Happiness turned out to be a fragile construct that needed to be protected not only from external threats, but also from the ghosts of the past. The next morning, he summoned Kim Dae-hee. "That man," the boss said, looking out the window. "I need complete information. Where he is, how he lives, who he associates with." Dae-hee nodded silently. He had long since prepared a dossier. Jang Min-ho, Ami's ex-husband, didn't just disappear. He carefully constructed a new life. He rented an expensive apartment in a prestigious neighborhood, got a job at a reputable company using forged documents, and moved in circles where he was considered a successful bachelor. Hyun especially paid attention. One fact that caught Ju's attention was that Min-ho regularly visited an elite club where he played a game with influential people, pretending to have a significant fortune. Hyun's view Ju grew cold. He didn't just abandon his family. He built his fortune on lies and money stolen from a child. For a man whose life was built on a code of honor, this was worse than betrayal. It was complete moral failure. Instead of brute force, Hyunju chose a more sophisticated approach. A week later, company management received an anonymous letter containing documents proving the forgery and Min-ho's true story. At the same time, his playing partners learned that their successful colleague was not only a liar, but also a man who had left his own son destitute. The collapse was swift. Dismissal, exposure in the eyes of new acquaintances, eviction. All of this befell Min-ho in the space of a few days. No, Hyunju didn't stop there. He personally visited the fallen man at his cheap motel. "Did you think you could just steal a child's future and start over?" Hyun asked. Ju, looking at the trembling man, offered a deal instead of physical violence, an official renunciation of parental rights in exchange for a lump sum sufficient to start a new, albeit modest, life in another city. Back home, Hyunju found Amy teaching Elle the piano. He didn't tell them about the meeting, but simply addressed the boy. "Remember, son, true strength doesn't come from breaking others, but from protecting those you love." The next morning, Hyunju announced a surprising decision. He was stepping down from day-to-day management of the business, handing over the reins to trusted associates. "I've taken on more important responsibilities," he explained to his surprised subordinates. Now his days were devoted to his family. Morning walks with Elle and before school, helping Amy set up her own small business, a flower shop, evenings spent working on joint projects. He even hired a private music teacher, noticing the boy's interest in the piano. One evening, while watching Amy and Elle practice a new melody together, Hyunju realized a strange truth. Thanks to the scoundrel who had destroyed their past life, he had found his own future. Revenge lost all meaning in the face of this simple family happiness. "Daddy, come to us!" Lee Hyun called. Ju, casting aside all thoughts, joined his family at the piano. For the first time in years, he felt less like the boss of a crime family and more like a man who had found his true calling, to be the head of his family, the protector and support of those who had entrusted their hearts to him. A year and a half had passed since the day their strange family was formed under one roof. One quiet Sunday evening, when Elle was already asleep, Ami and Hyun, the Ju family, sat in the winter garden. Rain fell outside the glass, and the room smelled of blooming orchids and freshly brewed tea. Ami, looking at the raindrops running down the glass, said quietly, "Today, Elle asked me if he will have a brother or sister. He says that many children in the kindergarten already have them." Hyunju turned to face her, his hard features softening. He took her hand in his, large, scarred hands, but now more often holding children's hands and cups of tea than weapons. "And what did you tell him?" he asked calmly. "What will we think?" Amy smiled, but a shadow of the old uncertainty, that fear that seemed to have long since gone away, flashed in her eyes. Hyunju noticed this. He pulled her close, and she pressed her head against his shoulder. "I will never treat you like that man." His voice was quiet, but with an unshakable confidence that left no room for doubt. "I will never abandon you, betray you, or humiliate you. And our children," he paused, choosing his words, "our children will be bathed in love. They will know what safety and respect are. That is my most important vow, to you and to them." Amy closed her eyes, listening to the beat of his heart. It beat steadily and strongly. It was a rhythm of reliability. "I know," she whispered. Sometimes I'm still afraid to believe in this happiness." "Don't be afraid." He ran his hand through her hair. "Because this happiness is my greatest acquisition, the most precious thing I have." He fell silent, looking out the window at the rain-lit city lights. This city had once been a chessboard for him, full of danger and intrigue. Now it was simply the place where his family lived. "I used to think success was power, money, the fear you instilled," he began, a rare wistfulness creeping into his voice. "I built an empire, thinking it was my legacy, but it was an empty, cold edifice, until you and Elle walked into my home." He hugged her tighter. "You asked me why I almost retired? Because I found something more important. I realized how good it is when there's warmth in the house, when you hear children's laughter, when someone tells you about their day at dinner in the evening. This is the greatest success. To be a husband, a father, the head of a family built on love, not fear." Amy looked up at him, and tears were shining in them, but this time they were of pure, unconditional joy. "So, we can really think about a second one?" she asked, and the hope that had once seemed lost forever sounded in her voice again. "We can't just think," Hyunju smiled his rare yet transformative smile. "We'll wait for him, or her, and our Elle will become the best big brother in the world, and I." He looked at her belly, his gaze filled with tenderness and awe. "I'll be there every step of the way. At every ultrasound, I'll hold your hand. I'll read him stories while he's still inside you. I won't miss a thing." They sat like that for a long time, listening to the rain and the quiet sounds of the sleeping house, a house that had finally become a real home, filled with warmth, love, and the anticipation of new happiness. Hyunju held his wife in his arms and knew he had found what he had been searching for all his life, without even realizing it, and he vowed to himself that he would guard this fragile and beautiful world until his last breath. 3 months had passed since that conversation in the winter garden. One morning, at breakfast, Amy put her hand on her stomach and quietly said, "Hyungju, we need to go to the doctor. It looks like your dream is starting to come true." That same day, the clinic confirmed that Ami was 2 months pregnant. Hyunju, usually completely reserved, walked out of the doctor's office with shining eyes and, oblivious to those around him, hugged his wife tightly right in the hallway. "Lee will be the happiest big brother," he whispered, his voice trembling with an unfamiliar emotion. The news was announced to Elle at dinner. The boy froze at first, then jumped with joy. "I'm having a little sister! I want a little sister!" he shouted, running around the table. "What if it's a brother?" Amy smiled. Lee replied with an air of importance. "But I'll still protect him, just like Dad protects us." From that day on, a special atmosphere of anxious anticipation reigned in the house. Hyunju seemed to have forgotten his dreadful past. He personally monitored Amy's schedule, hired the best nutritionist, and read pregnancy books aloud in the evenings, running his hand over her barely rounded belly. "He can't hear anything yet, silly," Amy laughed. "I'm already talking to him," Hyun answered seriously. "Ju, let him get used to my voice." Meanwhile, Lee assumed the role of chief guardian of his mother's peace of mind. He selflessly painted pictures for the future nursery, helped choose names, and every night before bedtime, he told his mother's belly fairy tales of his own making. "And then the brave knight Elle defeated the dragon and protected his little sister," he usually finished, and Amy and Hyun the Juice exchanged glances full of tenderness. One day, Hyunju brought home a large package. Unwrapping it, Amy gasped. It was a handcrafted cradle made of dark wood, elegant and sturdy. "I designed it myself," he said with a touch of pride, "and I'll be rocking our baby every night." But the most touching surprise was the room that Hyunju cooked secretly. Next to their bedroom, he set up a boudoir for Ami, a bright space with a bay window overlooking the garden, a soft rocking chair, and a special feeding station. An ultrasound photo hung on the wall, and on a shelf stood the first tiny booties Lee had bought her. "This is your refuge," he explained, "where you can rest when you're tired, where the 3 of us, the 4 of us, will spend time together." However, one night, the silence was broken by a call from Dae-hee Hyun-ju, frowning, walked into the office. It turned out that one of his old enemies, having learned of Ami's pregnancy, had tried to use proxies to contact the family in order to blackmail Hyun-ju. But instead of becoming enraged, Hyun-ju remained icy calm. "Take care of this, Dae-hee, forever, but without unnecessary noise. Not a single shadow must fall on my house." The threat was nipped in the bud, and Amy never knew about the late-night call from Hyun. Ju returned to the bedroom, lay down next to his wife, put his hand on her stomach, and fell asleep with one thought. His main mission was to be a shield for this fragile, precious life. The next morning, Elle proudly handed his mother a new drawing. It depicted their family, himself, a smiling Hyunju, a beaming Ami with a round belly, and next to her, a little girl holding their hands. "This is our future," the boy said seriously. Amy took the drawing with trembling fingers and understood. Despite all the past storms, they had finally found a safe haven, and this child, whom they had so longed for, would be born into a world full of love and protection, everything she herself had been deprived of as a child. Hyunju, hugging them both, looked out the window at the cloudless sky. He knew. True wealth lies not in money or power, but in these simple morning moments, in the warmth of family and the quiet anticipation of a miracle, and he would do everything to ensure this peace was never disturbed. Hyunju stood by the bedroom window, watching the first rays of sunlight paint the sky in soft peach tones. Behind him, wrapped in a blanket, Amy slept. Her belly was already noticeably rounded. The 6th month of pregnancy made her movements more fluid and her gaze more profound. He turned and quietly approached the bed. Her face seemed serene in the morning light, but the shadow of fatigue around her eyes betrayed a difficult night. The baby was making its presence known with frequent kicks, preventing the mother from getting a good night's sleep. Hyunju sat on the edge of the bed and placed his palm on her stomach. Almost immediately, she gave him a strong, confident push. He smiled. This daily ritual had become more important to him than any business meeting. Amy slowly opened her eyes. "Your son is keeping me awake again," she whispered with a smile. "Daughter," he corrected gently. "She's just energetic, like her mother." He helped her up, placing pillows behind her back. His movements were precise and gentle. Over the months, he had learned to anticipate her every need. "Today is a big day," Amy reminded. "Lee is performing at the school recitation competition." "I haven't forgotten," Hyun nodded. "Jukyu, the car will be here at 2. And yes, I arranged for his performance to be recorded on video." She looked at him tenderly. This formidable man, who had once inspired fear in the entire city, was now discussing the school events program with touching seriousness. As they went down to breakfast, they found Elle engaged in something unusual. The boy was sitting at the table, carefully studying a book on newborn care. "Dad, look," he said seriously, pointing to the illustration. "This tells you how to hold the baby properly. I need to be ready." Hyunju exchanged a warm glance with Ami. Ever since they'd told Elle about the pregnancy, the boy had devoted himself entirely to preparing for his new role. He'd given up some of his extracurricular activities to spend more time helping his mother, compiled a list of names himself, and even started saving his allowance for a gift for his future sister. "You'll be a wonderful big brother," Amy said, stroking his hair. Lee answered confidently, "I promise to protect her." After breakfast, Hyunju walked his son to school and then went to his office. But instead of the usual business reports, plans for a garden renovation lay on his desk. He planned to build a playground there, a safe one, specially designed for different ages. In the middle of the day, as promised, he picked up Amy and they went to school. In the crowded assembly hall, Hyunju, who usually avoided public events, firmly guided his wife to the front row. When Elle walked onto the stage, Amy instinctively squeezed her husband's hand. The boy, seeing them, smiled and began reciting a poem about family. His voice was clear and confident, and his words surprisingly mature for his age. "Family is more than just blood, and more than just a shared home. It's the hands that catch you again when you fall head over heels." Hyunju looked at his son, and there was moisture in his usually impenetrable eyes. He remembered their first meeting, a frightened boy in a dark room. Now, a confident young man stood before him. After Elle's performance, he ran up to them, beaming with pride. "Did you hear? I chose this poem especially for you." Suddenly, Amy turned pale and clutched her stomach. "I think contractions are starting," she whispered. Time stood still. The due date was still 3 months away. Hyunju's expression instantly changed. His tenderness gave way to cold concentration. He supported his wife with one hand, while with the other, he was already dialing his doctor's number. "Don't be afraid," he said firmly, looking into her frightened eyes. "Everything will be fine. I promise." The hospital was ready for their arrival. Top specialists were already waiting in the maternity ward. Ju, ignoring the protocols, walked with Amy into the ward. For 12 hours, he didn't leave her side. He held her hand, wiped the sweat from her brow, and whispered words of encouragement. When the doctors mentioned a possible cesarean section, his voice didn't waver. "Do whatever it takes. Save them both." The birth was difficult but quick. When their daughter's first cry was heard, Hyunju exhaled for the first time in hours. He looked at Amy, exhausted but radiant, and pressed his forehead to her hand. "A girl," the doctor said, handing him a tiny bundle. Hyunju picked up his daughter with incredible care. The baby weighed less than 2 kilograms, but she was breathing steadily. Her tiny fingers gripped his with unexpected strength. "Soyun," Amy whispered, looking at them. They had chosen the name together, innocent and kind. Lee stood there, holding a huge bouquet and looking frightened. Ju walked up to him and, without letting go of his daughter, sat down at the boy's level. "Meet your sister," he said quietly. Lee carefully touched the tiny hand. "She's so small. I'll protect her." "We both will," Hyun answered firmly. "Ju?" A week later, their unusual family was reunited at home. So Yoon's room was ready, warm, cozy, with a cradle, which Hyunju made it with his own hands. On the very first night, Amy was awakened by quiet sounds. Walking into the nursery, she found a touching picture. Hyunju sat in a rocking chair, holding his daughter on his chest, and Elle slept on the floor nearby, covered with a blanket, his hand on his father's leg. Seeing her, Hyunju smiled. She didn't want to fall asleep alone. We decided to keep her company. At that moment, Amy understood. Their family had endured fear, deception, and danger to find this simple happiness. And each of them, from the smallest to the strongest, would cherish this miracle. Hyunju looked at his sleeping son, his daughter on his chest, his wife in the doorway, and felt complete peace. Finally, there was something more important in his life than power and control. Something worth living for. Evening had fallen over the mansion, filling the living room with a cozy twilight. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed tea and the cookies Amy had baked earlier that day. They sat together on the sofa, cuddled close, watching Elle carefully arrange a puzzle on the carpet. "Sometimes I still dream about those first days," Amy said quietly, staring into the fireplace. "How I trembled with fear when I led Elle into that room upstairs. Every rustle seemed like the footsteps of a guard. And I remember you standing in my office during the interview. Your eyes give you away. They were always too honest to lie." His hand rested on her shoulder, his thumb slowly tracing the fabric of her blouse. "When you found us, I was sure it was all over." She turned to him, her eyes glittering in the dim light. "Why didn't you throw us out then?" "Because I saw in you not a thief but a mother, and in this boy." He nodded toward Elle, and "I saw someone worth protecting. In my world, that's what matters most." Lee looked up from his puzzle. "And I remember when you bought me that first car and told me it was my home now." He smiled, and there was no trace of the frightened child from before in his smile. "It was the easiest choice in my life," Hyun said. Ju, looking at both of them. "It just took a while to figure it out." Amy took his hand in hers. "You know what I'm thinking about? About that maid you fired before me? If it weren't for her stealing, you never would have looked for a new assistant." "Fate works in strange ways," he agreed. "It took one deceiver and sent me, you. Were afraid to approach Dad at first?" Amy turned to Elle. The boy nodded, having assembled the last pieces of the puzzle. "Then I realized he has the strongest arms in the world. And when he carries me, nothing bad can happen." Silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackling of the logs in the fireplace. They sat there, three people whose lives had intertwined in the most unexpected way, creating something more lasting and valuable than any wealth. "Do you know what I regret?" Hyunju broke the silence. "For not meeting you sooner. For not being able to protect you and Elle from the very beginning." Amy shook her head, clinging to him. "Don't regret it. Perhaps it was by going through all this that we were able to truly appreciate what we have now." They sat for a long time, recalling those first difficult days, those first timid smiles, the first time Elle called him Daddy. Every memory, once so painful, now became part of their shared history, a scar woven into a pattern of love and devotion. And when night had finally taken hold, they climbed the stairs, no longer a master and a maid with a secret child, but a family. A family that had chosen each other and endured fear and mistrust to find something that no amount of money could buy, a real home.